Samuel Hartley was a man the land seemed to have carved for itself. His face carried the marks of the wind and the sun. His hands were rough from years of gripping reins and mending fences, and his voice was low and steady, like the distant rumble of thunder over dry plains. People in town called him Sam the Silent, not because he was unfriendly, but because he spoke only when he had something worth saying. He lived alone on a wide stretch of New Mexico land, where the red earth stretched as far as the eye could see and the sky seemed endless. The ranch had once been full of life, laughter, the sound of children chasing chickens, and the soft hum of his wife singing as she cooked by the window. But that was long ago. His wife Clara had passed away one bitter winter when fever swept through the valley. Their daughters Mary and Ellen were still young then, barely old enough to understand loss, yet old enough to remember the way their father's eyes changed after that day. After Clara's passing, the house grew quiet. The once cheerful room seemed too big, the laughter too distant. Sam buried himself in work, rising before dawn and working until stars covered the sky. The animals became his company. The horses knew his whistle, and the cattle seemed to sense his steady patience. He found comfort in routine, in the familiar sound of boots crunching over dry earth, in the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. Years went by this way, each day blending into the next like waves of dust in the wind. When his daughters grew older, he sent them east for schooling. He wanted more for them than this lonely stretch of land. They wrote him letters full of stories, city lights, fine dresses, dances, books. Sam kept those letters neatly in a wooden box beside his bed. He would read them on cold nights by the fire, his eyes softening with pride and a touch of longing. But as the years passed, the letters became fewer, and the house seemed emptier than before. Sam didn't complain. He never did. He had made peace with loneliness, though peace was not the same as happiness. Sometimes, while mending a fence or watching the horizon, he would imagine his wife beside him again, her soft voice teasing him for working too hard. He would smile at the thought, then shake his head and return to his chores. In town, people admired Sam for his strength and independence, but few truly knew him. He wasn't the kind of man to share his thoughts easily. On Sundays, he'd ride into the small town of Silver Creek to buy supplies. He'd nod politely to folks, share a few words with the shopkeeper, and sometimes sit on the porch of the general store, sipping black coffee while others talked about weather, cattle prices, or local gossip. He never joined in much. When someone asked how he was doing, his usual answer was a quiet, "Can't complain." The truth was, he could have complained plenty, but there was no one to listen. As the years rolled on, Sam grew older but not weaker. His hair turned gray, his back a little stiffer, but his spirit stayed steady. The land had become a mirror of his soul, quiet, stubborn, weathered, yet still alive. The sunrises still moved him, and every spring when wildflowers painted the fields in bright colors, he would stop his horse and take it all in. In those rare moments, he felt the whisper of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. One cold evening in late autumn, Sam sat by the fireplace with his dog, Rusty, lying at his feet. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but the fire glowed warm and bright. He took out the old box of letters from his daughters and untied the ribbon around them. The paper had yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but each word still felt alive. He read the first letter from Mary, written when she was 12. "Pa, we miss you every day. The city is big and noisy, but Ellen and I study hard. We'll make you proud. Please don't forget to eat proper meals and rest. Ellen says you probably still skip lunch. Love, Mary." A faint smile tugged at Sam's lips. "Still bossing me around," he muttered fondly. Then he picked up the last letter he had received, nearly 6 months old. It said they were finishing their studies and might come home soon, though they weren't sure when. He folded it carefully and placed it back in the box. His eyes lingered on the fire for a long time, the light flickering across his worn face. "Be good to see them again," he whispered. "If they even remember what home looks like." Rusty raised his head and gave a low, soft bark as if agreeing. Days turned into weeks. Winter came early that year, bringing frost and long nights. Sam worked harder than usual, making sure the animals had enough feed and that the fences were strong against the cold winds. Sometimes he caught himself imagining what it would be like to have laughter in the house again, to hear his daughters' voices echo through the halls, to share a meal that didn't taste of silence. One afternoon, While he was repairing a gate near the edge of the property, a passing traveler stopped by. "You Mr. Hartley?" the man asked. "Heard tell your girls are coming home soon." Sam looked up from his work, surprised. "You sure about that?" "Sure as can be," the man said with a grin. "Train's coming in next week from the east. Folks say 2 young ladies asked about the road to Silver Creek Ranch." For a moment, Sam just stood there, hammer in hand, the wind tugging at his hat brim. His heart gave a quiet, unfamiliar flutter. He nodded, trying to sound calm. "Appreciate you telling me." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat up in bed, staring at the moonlight spilling across the wooden floor. His daughters, his little girls, coming home after all these years. He wondered what they looked like now. Were they still as sweet and kind as he remembered? Would they find the ranch too small, too rough? Would they stay, or leave again once they'd had enough of the quiet life? The thought worried him, but beneath it all was a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He rose before dawn the next morning, full of restless energy. He cleaned the house, brushed the dust off old picture frames, and even fixed the squeaky porch door that had bothered him for years. He mended the curtains and washed the dishes until the kitchen gleamed. Rusty followed him from room to room, wagging his tail, sensing his master's excitement. On the day of their arrival, Sam dressed in his cleanest shirt, a blue one Clara had sewn years ago. He saddled his best horse, Duke, and rode into town. The sky was clear, the air crisp. As he rode, memories flooded his mind. Mary chasing butterflies, Ellen laughing as she tried to climb the corral fence, Clara calling them in for supper. He felt as if time had folded, bringing all those lost moments back for a second chance. When he reached the small train station, he saw a few townsfolk waiting, chatting as smoke rose from the iron engine in the distance. The whistle echoed across the hills and Sam's heart beat faster. The train came to a halt, its doors opening with a hiss of steam. Passengers stepped down, travelers, merchants, strangers. Then he saw them. Mary was taller now, her face bright with joy, her eyes sparkling just like her mother's. Ellen, a little shy but smiling wide, clutched her sister's arm. They both wore traveling dresses, dusty from the journey, but they looked radiant to him, like sunlight after years of rain. Sam lifted his hat, unable to hide the smile spreading across his face. "Pa!" Mary cried, running toward him. Ellen followed close behind. He stepped forward, and for a moment time stopped. When they hugged him, all the loneliness he had carried for years seemed to melt away. His arms, strong and trembling, wrapped around them tightly. "You girls sure grew up on me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Mary laughed through her tears. "And you got grayer, Pa." He chuckled softly. "Guess we all changed some." Then, as he looked past them, he noticed someone else stepping off the train. A young woman with long dark hair, her skin sun-kissed. Her eyes calm but sharp as a hawk's. She wore a simple woven shawl and carried herself with quiet dignity. Before Sam could ask, Mary turned and said, "Pa, this is Naiche. She helped us, and she's coming home with us." Sam's brows lifted, but he said nothing yet. He just nodded politely to the stranger who stood before him. In that quiet moment, as the wind lifted the dust around their boots and the sun dipped low behind the hills, something shifted in Sam's heart. He didn't yet know how much his life was about to change, but deep down a part of him sensed it. For the first time in years, the journey home didn't feel lonely at all. The days after Mary and Ellen returned home were filled with both joy and surprise. For Samuel Hartley, the quiet cowboy who had grown used to silence, it felt strange and wonderful to hear laughter echoing in the old house again, the sound of footsteps running through the hall, the clatter of dishes, and the sweet hum of Ellen singing while she unpacked. All of it filled his world with color once more. Yet, there was something new, something unexpected. The presence of Naiche, the young Apache woman who had come home with his daughters. Sam had not expected to have a stranger under his roof, much less someone from a world so different from his own. But from the moment he looked into Naiche's calm eyes at the train station, he had sensed something steady and kind in her. Still, he wasn't sure how to act around her. Years of solitude had made him careful with words and cautious with people. The first few days, Naiche spoke very little. She seemed shy, though not afraid, more like someone who was quietly learning the rhythm of a new place. She helped unpack supplies, cooked alongside Mary and Ellen, and kept herself busy from dawn to dusk. Sam often found her outside at sunrise, standing still at the edge of the corral, watching the sky turn gold over the hills. One morning, while Sam was feeding the horses, he saw her walking toward the barn with a soft step, her dark hair braided neatly down her back. She carried a wooden bowl of feed in her hands, and when the horses turned their heads toward her, she smiled. The animals seemed calm in her presence, as if they trusted her instantly. "You handle them well," Sam said quietly, leaning against the fence. Nietzsche turned, surprised that he had spoken first. Her English was careful but clear. "Animals understand peace," she replied softly. "They know when hearts are calm." Sam nodded, watching her for a moment longer. "Reckon that's true?" It was a short exchange, but it lingered with him for the rest of the day. That evening, as the family sat down for supper, Mary told stories of their time in the city, of carriages, dances, and how they had once gotten lost in the fog. Ellen laughed until she cried, and even Sam found himself chuckling. Nietzsche sat quietly, smiling at their laughter, her eyes warm. When Ellen finished her story, Nietzsche spoke for the first time at the table. "In my village," she said softly, "we tell stories by the fire each night. We speak of the day's work and the lessons it gave. Stories keep hearts close." Sam looked at her curiously. "Sounds like a good custom." She smiled gently. "It keeps the dark away." For a moment the room fell quiet. Then Mary nodded. "Maybe we can start doing that here, Pa. We can all share stories again." Sam's gaze softened. "Ain't a bad idea." From that night on, storytelling became their evening tradition. Sometimes Sam spoke of the old days, when he and Clara first built the ranch, when the girls were born, or when the rains came after a long drought. Other times, Nietzsche shared stories from her people, tales of rivers that sang, eagles that carried messages from the sky, and the lessons of the land. Her words painted pictures that felt alive, as though the very air listened. Each story seemed to stitch the family closer together. Still, Sam couldn't help but notice how the townsfolk looked at them when they rode into Silver Creek for supplies. Some nodded politely, but others whispered behind their hands. People in those days carried old opinions about those they didn't understand. Sam saw it in their eyes, curiosity mixed with judgment. One afternoon, as they loaded supplies into the wagon, an older man at the store called out, "Didn't expect to see a lady like her out here." His tone was friendly on the surface, but his words carried a sharp edge. Sam didn't answer at first. He simply tipped his hat and said calmly, "She's family now." The man blinked, unsure what to say, and Sam turned back to his wagon. Mary gave her father a proud look, while Nietzsche said nothing, her face steady as stone. But later that evening, Sam noticed her sitting alone by the corral, staring at the stars. He walked over quietly. "Don't pay mind to folks in town," he said, stopping beside her. "They talk more than they listen." Nietzsche looked up at him. "Words do not wound me, Mr. Hartley. I've heard many before. But sometimes they make others uncomfortable." He nodded slowly. "World's changing, Nietzsche. Some folks just take longer to catch up." She smiled faintly, her gaze still on the stars. "The stars never change. Maybe that is why I like them." Sam found himself smiling too. There was peace in her words, the kind he hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, life at the ranch found a new rhythm. Nietzsche worked alongside Sam and the girls, mending fences, helping with cattle, and cooking hearty meals. She taught Mary and Ellen how to weave small baskets from desert grass and how to find herbs that could soothe burns or fever. Sam watched her move with quiet confidence, graceful but strong. One afternoon, when a young colt broke loose and ran toward the hills, Sam saddled up quickly to chase it. Before he could ride out, Nietzsche stepped forward and said, "I will help." "You ride?" Sam asked, surprised. She smiled. "Since I could walk." They rode together under the hot sun, the wind whipping through the grass. Sam was impressed by the way she guided her horse, firm but gentle. They found the colt by a creek, trembling and tangled in brush. Nietzsche moved slowly, humming softly, her calm voice soothing the frightened animal. When they finally freed it, she brushed its mane and whispered, "You are safe." As they led the colt back, Sam looked at her with quiet admiration. "You got away with creatures," he said. She smiled, her eyes bright. "Maybe because I understand what it is to feel alone." Sam said nothing for a long while. Those words stayed with him all the way home. That evening, as the sky blazed orange and purple, Sam sat on the porch watching the horizon. The ranch looked alive again, Smoke rising from the chimney, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the warm glow of lamplight through the windows. For the first time in years, it truly felt like home. Mary stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "Pa," she said, smiling, "Nitya made supper tonight. She cooked something called corn stew. It smells wonderful." Sam stood and nodded. "Then we best not keep it waiting." When he entered the kitchen, the aroma of corn, beans, and spices filled the air. Nitya stood by the stove, stirring the pot. She looked up and said softly, "It is an old recipe from my grandmother." They sat down to eat, and Sam took the first spoonful. The flavors were rich and warm, full of comfort. "That's mighty fine stew," he said. Nitya's eyes lit up. "I'm glad you like it," Ellen grinned. "Pa doesn't praise easily, so that's saying something." They all laughed, and Sam joined in, the sound deep and genuine. After supper, they sat together outside, watching the moon rise over the hills. The air was cool and the crickets sang softly. Sam felt a stillness settle in his heart, the kind of peace he hadn't known in years. He glanced at Nitya, who was sitting quietly, her face bathed in moonlight. She looked at home beneath the stars, as though she belonged to the land itself. In that moment, Sam realized something had shifted within him. It wasn't love, not yet, but a growing respect, a quiet admiration for the woman who had stepped into his world without fear and filled it with calm strength. He didn't know what the future held, but as he looked at his daughters laughing beside the fire and Nitya smiling softly in the glow, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the beginning of happiness. And for Samuel Hartley, the lonely cowboy who had once accepted silence as his only companion, that was more than enough. The days at Silver Creek Ranch rolled on, marked by the steady rhythm of sunrise and sunset. For Samuel Hartley, life had taken a new shape. The loneliness that had once filled every corner of his home was now replaced with laughter, warmth, and the sound of busy footsteps. Mary and Ellen had brought youth and joy back into the place, and Nitya had brought something else, peace. Still, Sam was a man of quiet observation. He noticed things others might not. The way Nitya always rose before dawn to fetch water from the well, or how she stood silently for a moment every morning facing the east as if greeting the day with gratitude. He noticed how calm she was, how she never rushed, never complained, even when work was hard or the weather cruel. There was a calm strength in her that reminded him of the land itself, silent, steady, and unshakable. But along with admiration came something else. Confusion. Sam wasn't used to feeling uncertain about people. Most folks were easy to read. You knew if they were honest or not by the look in their eyes. But Nitya carried mysteries behind hers, not the kind that frightened him, but the kind that made him curious. One morning, Sam found her near the creek that ran along the back of the property. She was gathering smooth stones and placing them carefully in a circle. The early light painted the sky soft pink, and the sound of water was gentle. Sam stood for a moment, not wanting to disturb her. Finally, he said, "That's a fine morning for rock collecting." Nitya turned, smiling. "It is not for collecting," she said. "It is for remembering." "Remembering what?" She looked down at the stones. "My mother taught me this. When we miss someone, we make a circle of stones. It means their spirit still walks around us." Sam grew quiet. The soft sound of the creek filled the silence between them. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "That's a good way to remember." She smiled again. "You have someone to remember too." Her words were gentle, but they touched something deep in him. "Yes," he said finally. "My wife." Nitya picked up a small white stone and placed it in the circle. "Then she walks with us now," she said simply. Sam's throat tightened, and for the first time in years he didn't know what to say. He tipped his hat and walked back to the house quietly, but that morning stayed with him for days. As spring turned to summer, the ranch flourished. The rains came just right, and the fields grew thick with grass. The cattle were strong, and even the horses seemed livelier. Sam often said it was a lucky season, but deep down, he knew it was more than luck. The women brought life into the ranch in ways he couldn't explain. The days were long and filled with work, but they were good days. Sam taught Mary and Ellen how to fix the fences, and Naicha helped him repair the old barn roof. They shared meals under the big cottonwood tree, laughing at simple things, a stubborn mule, a burnt loaf of bread, or Ellen's constant habit of tripping over her own feet. But despite the lightness, a quiet tension sometimes lingered between Sam and Naicha. It wasn't unpleasant, more like an invisible thread connecting them, something neither quite understood. Sam tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just gratitude. She had saved his daughter's lives, after all, but gratitude didn't make his heart beat faster when she smiled, or make his words stumble when she looked at him. One afternoon, a storm began to build over the valley. The air grew heavy, the sky darkened, and thunder rolled far away. Sam hurried to bring the animals into the shelter. Naicha appeared beside him, already carrying ropes and blankets. "You feel it?" she said, looking at the clouds. "Sure do," Sam replied, glancing at her. "Big one coming." The wind whipped across the field, carrying the scent of rain. Together they worked quickly, guiding the horses and cattle into the barn. The storm broke just as they finished, sheets of rain pouring down, lightning flashing across the sky. Inside the barn, the air was warm and thick with the smell of hay. The animals shuffled and snorted, uneasy from the thunder. Naicha moved among them, whispering softly, her voice calm. Sam watched her, struck again by her gentleness. "You've got away with them," he said, raising his voice over the rain. She smiled faintly. "When the heart is calm, the animals listen." Sam chuckled. "Maybe I ought to learn that trick myself." She looked at him then, eyes meeting his. "Your heart is already calm, Mr. Hartley," she said softly. The sound of rain filled the barn, steady and peaceful. Sam opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come. He simply nodded, his chest tightening with an emotion he didn't have a name for. When the storm finally passed, they stepped outside together. The air smelled fresh, and a rainbow arched across the horizon. The sunlight touched Naicha's face, and for a moment, Sam forgot the years between them, the walls he had built, the rules of his quiet world. That night, the whole family gathered by the fire, drying their boots and laughing about how soaked they'd gotten. Ellen teased Sam for looking like a drowned coyote, and he laughed harder than he had in years. Naicha sat quietly, smiling at their jokes, her dark eyes soft. Later, after everyone went to bed, Sam lingered by the dying fire. His thoughts drifted back to the moment in the barn. Her words, her calm gaze, the strange warmth in his chest. He shook his head and muttered to himself, "You're getting soft, old man." But deep down he knew it wasn't weakness he felt. It was something far gentler. The next few weeks were peaceful. The land seemed kinder, the days brighter. Naicha began planting a small garden behind the house, filled with herbs and flowers. She taught Mary and Ellen how to dry sage and make tea from mint leaves. Sam often watched them from a distance, his heart full but silent. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Naicha came to the porch carrying a basket of herbs. "For your tea," she said, setting it down. Sam smiled. "You keep bringing me gifts." "They are not gifts," she said softly. "They are ways to make life kinder." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, you've surely done that." She smiled again, and in that quiet moment, something changed between them. Not spoken, not forced, just a gentle knowing. That night, as Sam lay in bed listening to the soft rustle of wind outside, he realized how much had changed since the day his daughter stepped off that train. The man who once lived in silence now had a home full of laughter and light. And, somewhere along the way, his heart had started to heal, not just from the loneliness, but from the fear of feeling again. He still didn't fully understand what was growing between him and Naicha, but he didn't fight it either. For now, it was enough to feel alive again, to wake up each morning with purpose, to share stories by the fire, and to look forward to the simple joy of another day. As he drifted to sleep, he remembered something Naicha had said the day she built the circle of stones by the creek. "When we miss someone, we make a circle. It means their spirit still walks around us. He smiled in the dark, realizing that maybe Clara's spirit still walked with him too, and maybe, just maybe, she was the one who had sent Nietzsche into his life. Outside, the night was calm, and the stars shimmered quietly above the ranch. And in that peace, Samuel Hartley, once a lonely cowboy, found himself feeling something he had long forgotten how to feel. Hope. Summer had settled over the valley with its golden light and long, quiet evenings. The days at Silver Creek Ranch were busy, but they carried a feeling of peace that Samuel Hartley hadn't known in years. The land was green after the spring rains, and wildflowers colored the hillsides like scattered paint. The cattle grazed lazily. The horses shone in the sunlight, and laughter could often be heard drifting from the porch in the evenings. For Sam, each day began early. He would rise before the first light, boil his coffee, and step outside to watch the sunrise spread over the mesas. Sometimes Nietzsche was already there, standing still in the cool morning air, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She never spoke during those moments. She just breathed in the day, calm and still, as though she was listening to something the rest of the world could not hear. One morning, Sam joined her silently. They stood side by side, watching the sky brighten. After a while, he said, "You start every day this way?" Nietzsche nodded. "The morning tells us how the day will be. If it begins in peace, the heart stays peaceful." Sam smiled softly. "Seems you've been teaching me more than I ever taught you." She turned her head slightly and said with quiet kindness, "We teach each other, Mr. Hartley. That is how life should be." That thought stayed with him as he saddled his horse for the day's work. The weeks passed easily, but the peace they had come to cherish was suddenly tested when the summer heat brought trouble to the land. The grass began to dry too fast, and one afternoon, Sam noticed a faint smell of smoke on the wind. He frowned, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing yet. Still, he felt uneasy. That night, as they sat down for supper, the air outside felt heavy. Even Rusty, the old dog, paced restlessly by the door. "The wind's too dry," Sam said, glancing toward the window. "Feels like something's coming." Nietzsche looked up from her plate. "The land speaks before it cries," she said quietly. "We should listen." The next afternoon, Sam's fears came true. A storm had rolled through the western hills, and though no rain had reached them, lightning had. When Sam stepped outside, he saw a dark plume of smoke rising from the far ridge. He didn't wait. "Fire," he said sharply, and everyone in the house froze. Mary gasped. "Is it close?" "Not yet," he said, grabbing his hat. "But it's headed our way if the wind keeps turning." Without hesitation, Nietzsche rose to her feet. "We must move the animals now." Sam met her eyes and nodded. "You take the horses. I'll get the cattle." For hours they worked side by side, driving the animals toward the creek where the ground was damp and the grass greener. The wind whipped hot and strong, carrying the sharp scent of burning wood. Mary and Ellen helped as best they could, bringing buckets of water and keeping the smaller animals safe near the barn. The fire didn't reach the ranch that night, but its glow painted the sky a deep orange. Exhausted, Sam and Nietzsche stood near the corral, their faces streaked with dust and sweat. "You did well," Sam said, his voice low but full of admiration. Nietzsche shook her head. "We all did. The land is kind tonight." The wind changed its mind. Sam followed her gaze toward the horizon where the flames had begun to die down. "Guess we got lucky." Nietzsche turned toward him, her expression thoughtful. "It wasn't luck. Sometimes the earth shows mercy when we show care." Her words touched him more deeply than she could have known. In the days that followed, they worked to repair what little damage had been done. Scorched fences, frightened animals, a few singed patches of grass. The fire had stopped before it reached the main fields, but the experience had brought the family even closer together. Sam saw how calmly Nietzsche had handled every moment, how steady she had been when others might have panicked. He had always respected her, but now that respect had grown into something stronger, something he tried not to name. One evening, a few days after the fire, Sam sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sage. Nietzsche stepped out quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Mint tea," she said, handing him one. "To calm the heart." Sam took it with a nod. "You always seem to know what's needed," she smiled softly. "The land tells me. And sometimes people do too." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The quiet stretched between them, comfortable and warm. Sam wanted to speak, but words felt too heavy for the moment. Finally, Nietzsche broke the silence. "When I first came here," she said softly, "I did not know if I would belong. I thought your world would not accept me. But now, this place feels like home." Sam looked at her, his heart full. "It's your home as much as anyone's," he said. "You've brought peace to this place, Nietzsche. To all of us." She lowered her eyes, her smile gentle. "And you have given me a place to stand." The air between them was quiet again, but this time it was full of unspoken understanding. As the days turned into weeks, Sam began to see how the world outside the ranch started to notice Nietzsche too. Some folks in town had learned that the Hartleys had taken in an Apache woman, and though most were polite, a few whispered behind their hands. Sam heard the murmurs but ignored them. To him, what mattered was simple. Nietzsche had become part of his family. One morning, when he went into Silver Creek to buy supplies, a man at the store said, "You've got quite a helper at your place, Hartley. Folks say she's something special." Sam paused as he loaded a sack of flour into his wagon. "She is," he said plainly. "And she's family." The man nodded awkwardly, and Sam rode home without another word. That evening, when he told Nietzsche what had been said, she looked surprised. "You called me family?" "I just said what's true," he replied. "You are." She smiled, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "Then I am proud to be." It was a simple exchange, but it changed something inside both of them. As summer began to fade, the nights grew cooler, and the first hints of autumn brushed the valley. The family often gathered by the fire again in the evenings, sharing stories. Sometimes Nietzsche would hum soft songs from her childhood, her voice as gentle as the wind through the pines. Sam found himself listening, not just with his ears but with his heart. One evening, when the others had gone to bed, Sam lingered by the fire once more. Nietzsche was still there, watching the flames dance. She looked thoughtful. "Do you ever miss your home?" Sam asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, but I think home can live in more than one place. My heart has two homes now." Her words caught him off guard. He didn't speak for a long time, afraid to disturb the quiet magic of her honesty. When he finally looked at her, the firelight flickered across her face, and he realized how much she had come to mean to him, not just as a guest or a friend, but as someone who had quietly changed everything about his life. He wanted to say something, but before he could, Nietzsche looked up and said softly, "The fire is low. You should rest, Mr. Hartley." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right, but thank you for everything." As he walked to his room that night, he felt something inside him awaken. Something he had long believed was gone. He didn't yet call it love. He didn't even let the thought form clearly. But deep in his heart, Samuel Hartley knew that the quiet strength of a woman who had once been a stranger was now the heartbeat of his home. And as he lay in bed, listening to the night breeze whisper through the open window, he realized something beautiful, that sometimes love doesn't arrive with noise or sudden sparks. Sometimes it grows like dawn over the desert, slow, steady, and full of light. Autumn came softly to the valley, painting the land in shades of gold and amber. The air grew cooler, the mornings misty, and the evenings carried a touch of chill that made the hearth's glow feel even warmer. For Samuel Hartley, the change of season felt different this year. Once, autumn had always been a time that reminded him of loss, of things fading away. But now it felt like a time of quiet renewal, like life itself was gently starting over. The ranch was thriving. The cattle were strong, the barns full, and laughter filled the evenings again. Mary and Ellen had settled into life back home, their once city habits replaced by the easy rhythm of country days. Nietzsche's garden bloomed even in the cool air, full of herbs, flowers, and late vegetables that gave the house a sweet, living scent. Every corner of the place carried her touch, from the clean porch where she often sat at sunset, to the small dream catcher she hung by the door, to keep good dreams inside, and as she said, even Rusty, the old dog, followed her everywhere she went, as if he too had found comfort in her presence. For Sam, life felt lighter. He had begun to smile more, laugh more, and even hum tunes while he worked, something his daughters noticed immediately. "Pa's getting soft," Ellen teased one afternoon, watching him repair a fence with a grin on his face. Mary laughed. "He's getting happy, that's what." Sam just shook his head, pretending not to hear them. But deep down he knew they were right. Happiness had returned to his life, quiet and steady, carried on the voice of a woman who had entered his world like a whisper and stayed like sunlight. As the days grew shorter, the family began preparing for winter. Sam worked hard, as he always did, but now there was joy in his work. He no longer felt the endless emptiness that had haunted him for years. There was always someone beside him, Mary laughing, Ellen singing, or Nige working quietly with her gentle hands. One evening after supper, Nige brought out a blanket she had been weaving for weeks. It was soft and beautifully patterned with shapes of the sky, mountains, and rivers. "I made this for you," she said, offering it to Sam. He touched the fabric carefully, surprised. "For me?" "Yes," she said simply. "For the winter nights. So you will remember that warmth does not come only from fire." Her words were soft but full of meaning. Sam looked at her for a long moment, his eyes kind. "That's one of the finest gifts I ever got," he said. "Thank you." Nige smiled, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. "It is not a gift," she replied. "It is something made from care." That night, as Sam sat alone by the fire, wrapped in the blanket she had made, he thought about all the ways his life had changed. He had once believed his story was nearly over, that he would spend the rest of his years watching sunsets alone. But now, he realized that some stories didn't end when you thought they would. Sometimes they began again when you least expected it. Days passed peacefully. The valley grew colder and the first snow dusted the mountains. One morning, when the air was crisp and still, Sam and Nige rode out together to check the fence line along the far ridge. The land stretched wide and beautiful beneath the pale winter sky. They rode in silence for a while, the sound of hooves soft against the frozen ground. Finally, Nige spoke. "When I first came here, I thought I was only passing through," she said. "I did not think I would stay." Sam looked at her. "And now?" She smiled gently. "Now I think the land wanted me to stay." He nodded slowly. "I think you're right." They stopped at the top of the ridge, where they could see the whole valley, the ranch below, smoke curling from the chimney, fields resting under a thin veil of frost. Nige looked out at it all and said quietly, "This land has a kind heart. It gave me a place when I had none, and it gave you peace again." Sam's eyes softened. "It surely did." For a moment, they both just stood there, watching the light shift across the hills. The wind was cold, but it carried a strange warmth too, the kind that comes from being exactly where you belong. As winter deepened, the family found comfort in small joys. Mary and Ellen baked bread and made songs out of chores, turning even simple work into laughter. Sam repaired old tools in the barn, and Nige wove baskets by the fire, her hands moving with patient grace. In the evenings, they all sat together telling stories. Nige shared more about her people, about traditions, kindness, and respect for the earth. Sam told tales from his younger days, sometimes funny, sometimes tender. The daughters often teased him, but their laughter made the old house feel alive. Then came a night that Sam would never forget. The snow had started falling gently outside and the world was quiet. The others had gone to bed, but Sam stayed by the fire, lost in thought. After a while, he heard soft footsteps. Nige stepped into the room wrapped in a shawl. "You are still awake," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Sam admitted with a smile. "Too much on my mind, I guess." She came closer, sitting across from him by the fire. The light danced across her face. "Sometimes," she said softly, "when the mind is full, we must listen to the heart instead." Sam nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong all these years, and listening to everything but my heart." She smiled faintly. "It is never too late to listen." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled quietly, filling the silence between them. He wanted to speak, but words felt small compared to what he felt inside. Finally, he said, "Nige, this place, it wasn't home anymore after Clara passed. I thought that part of my life was gone for good. But you came here and somehow you brought it back. You made it a home again, for all of us." Nige's eyes glistened softly in the firelight. "Maybe the heart only sleeps until someone wakes it." Sam's voice was low. "Then you surely woke mine." Neither said anything more after that. They didn't need to. The quiet between them said everything. In the months that followed, life at Silver Creek Ranch found its steady rhythm again. But now there was a new warmth in the air, a deeper peace that everyone could feel. The gossip in town faded away, replaced by respect for the quiet cowboy who had found happiness again in his later years. When spring returned, the land bloomed beautifully. Wildflowers covered the hills, and the creek sang louder than ever. The house was full of color and laughter, Mary and Ellen tending the garden, Nietzsche singing softly while hanging laundry in the breeze, and Sam sitting on the porch, his heart full. He often thought of the long years of silence he had once endured, and how they had led him here, to this moment, to this peace. Sometimes he would look over at Nietzsche and think that maybe life had a way of giving back what it once took away, if a person only waited with faith and kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Sam and Nietzsche sat on the porch together, watching the golden light fade. The air was warm and calm. Sam turned to her and said, "Funny thing, life. You spend half of it thinking you're done, and the other half realizing you were just beginning." Nietzsche smiled, her gaze soft on the horizon. "Every sunset is an ending and a beginning at the same time," she said. The sky never loses hope. Sam looked out across his land, the home that had once been filled with silence now alive with love. He reached out, resting his weathered hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand to hold his. The sun slipped below the hills, leaving the sky painted in soft pink and gold. The ranch dogs barked in the distance, the horses neighed softly, and the air filled with the quiet peace of evening. For the first time in a long, long while, Samuel Hartley felt whole. He knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more days and more stories, but whatever came, he wouldn't face it alone. Life, once so empty, had filled itself again, with laughter, family, and the gentle love of a woman who had come from another world and healed his heart. And as the stars began to shine above the valley, Sam smiled to himself. The lonely cowboy was lonely no more.